Right into it, the first item, Greg Myers, Director of the Office of Military Base Planning and Support. And he's going to give us a update on the Office of Military Base Planning and Support. And he is representing the Economic Development Department of the state of New Mexico. So Mr. Myers.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me now?
Yes. So turn this off every time I'm not speaking.
Greg, we can hear you. Go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you. Well, it's an honor to present before you today, and hopefully you have the presentation that was uploaded. I'm not going to get into a lot of background. I'll just start with the issues that I've been working on. The first slide deals with base realignment and closure. And I put this in because this is really the impetus of why my office was formed for the 2005 BRAC that occurred, and it's been in existence ever since. Currently, as you would expect with an election year, there's no thought of a BRAC round this year, and I personally doubt there will be one next year as well. But some of the issues that I've listed there are some of the key things that I believe the DoD is looking at. So when you look at excess capacity and infrastructure, that's expensive to maintain. So they're looking to consolidate and close down. I don't believe, with the exception of possibly White Sands, New Mexico installations generally don't have a great deal of excess capacity, and I believe the growth at most of our installations is allowing potentially busting out at the seams, if you will. Particularly at Kirtland. Climate change is also another factor that I believe decisions will be made upon if there are sustainment issues or resiliency issues at installations for any number of reasons. It could be hurricanes, any kind of climate. Those would also play a factor. And with all that said, even though there is no BRAC round in the forecast, major commands and headquarters agencies still move installations and missions around within bases on their own accord without congressional action. So we continue to make sure that all the New Mexico installations are well positioned to maintain and or grow the missions that our bases. So one of the things that my last bullet there in the first slide talks about military value and other criteria. The other criteria is actually leading toward community support. And if you go to the next slide, it starts talking about that. So the Air Force and their strategic basing decisions have now implemented two criteria as a part of their analysis. One is the reciprocity of professional licensures, and then I'm actually on 2 slides from the opening slide. One more slide. And the second factor is the public education. And they've just recently had their first scoring round based on both of these. And I will note that if you look in the left-hand column there, the professional licensure framework compacts are the most preferred level of reciprocity that the Air Force is looking for. We do have a couple compacts in place, and of course, House Bill 30 was passed last session, which greatly improved our position in this regard, although this scoring that was just released did not include that. They ended the scoring in December 2019. So the group is engaged in making sure that they have the current information and they will update the scoring annually. For public education, they rank it on 3 categories: academic performance, school climate, and service offering. Academic performance has 60% of the weighted grading and 20% for each of the other 2. But in terms of a breakdown in how they weight each of the individual items, that has not been released. So the slide that's showing on your screen right now is the education scoring for the 3 Air Force bases. You can see that all 3 were scored red due to the graduation rates at each of the installations being red as well. And the graph at the top shows that all 3 of our installations, our Air Force installations, were in the bottom third of all the Air Force installations that were scored. So this is an area that I'm engaging with Secretary Stewart and his staff on, and we'll be making sure, it's really, for me, it's a 2-prong approach. First approach is making sure that whatever data and information the Air Force is using to provide their scoring is accurate, updated, timely. And then secondly, once we understand better how they're scoring and what the data says, and that it's accurate, how we can begin to change some of those red colors to yellow and green. That'll be a long-term process, I'm sure. And the next slide shows their scoring for license portability. And again, we're in the yellow here. I don't know that after they review House Bill 30, whether that will turn green or not. It is possible, but I believe the law segment that is in red will play a major factor in that. So I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure of the weighting, and I'm not sure of all the other categories that they used in terms of professions to get their grading. The pie chart you see in this graph just shows out of the 50 states how many scored green, red, and then yellow. So we were in the vast majority for that. So we expect an update based on House Bill 30's changes to this scoring, and then we'll see how well that's done. And there's also efforts underway with the law boards to see if we can get a compact going for the legal profession to serve in that regard as well. The next slide, one of the big initiatives is the basing for the U.S. Space Command headquarters. And, Space Force, with all of the changes that are going on in that agency, this is really our first pass at gaining additional mission here in New Mexico. We believe that there may be opportunity for field commands to also bed down here when the decision comes. But when the criteria first came out, you see in phase 1 the nominations. It was really a self-nomination process. So if you met the 3 criteria that they listed, and those are listed there, you were able to nominate your city. Could place a nomination package in, and everybody that placed a nomination package and met the 3 criteria moved on to phase 2. Unfortunately, Albuquerque was the only city that met those 3 criteria. I was also looking potential Las Cruces and, you know, the Holloman and Cannon being so rural, it was unlikely that they would. But I looked at all of them, and Albuquerque was the only one that could get past phase one. So we just recently put in our phase two evaluation. It was a 100-point questionnaire. There were 19 total questions in the mission, capacity, and community categories. But as you notice on the second bullet under phase two, we really only have influence over 45% of the total points available. They, much like the education and license reciprocity scoring that they did through the Air Force, they're getting data outside of the communities and the installations that are putting in their bids. So most of the 55% of the points will come from standard databases that they will use for every package that's submitted. And then whatever we submit will cover the remaining 45%. We're expecting sometime November to January to get a feedback on whether or not we're going to proceed on to the next round or the next phase of the basing process, and expect that will likely entail a site visit. So the two primary locations that we put in the package were the extended land use lease option, which is known as Max Q, and it's right off of Gibson and right adjacent to AFRL and the base fencing. The other location is right across the street from that, actually, at what is currently the Maxwell housing area. So they have two potential options that they could look at. On to the next slide. In 2018, we entered an agreement with the Office of Economic Adjustment, DoD agency, with a grant to develop a GIS tool that would allow us to facilitate the planning, development, and construction of renewable energy projects. Excuse me. The project is currently managed by the MERCOG, and my office provided a lot of matching dollars to get that grant in play. The objectives of the grant are listed there, and really we're very close to having the tool, the web-based tool, come live. I've entered a contract with UNM's EDAC to host it, and I will provide the funds to make sure it's maintained and updated. So that recently just transitioned into EDAC, and they have it now up for a beta test to make sure that it's functioning properly and everything is working well. The other two bullets are going to be a bit challenging. The current approach is we're looking at an executive order that was issued many years ago that directs all state agencies who are looking at renewable energy options to make sure that they coordinate with military bases to ensure that there aren't any unintended consequences. And I think SunZia is probably the best example of why a tool like this can be very valuable, can help start the communications early between potential competing interests and help mitigate whatever challenges might exist early in the process. So hopefully this tool will end up saving the developers money and time in getting their projects going. The next slide, I've contracted with UNM's Bureau of Business and Economic Research to do an economic impact study for all 4 military installations. The last time the statewide comprehensive study was done was 2004, and it came up with a $4 billion impact, and the data is listed there. Currently, with all of the updated installation-specific studies that have been done since, we estimate that to be about $10 billion now, but we expect to have the actual results of that probably late next summer. So I'm currently in phase 1 of that, which the contract for phase 1 will end at the end of this month, and established communications between UNM and all of the installations so that they can assess the availability of the data that's out there, how easy it is to get, and then maybe assess what gaps might be out there. And once we understand that, we'll enter into a contract for the phase 2, which will actually collect the data and publish the report, which again, I expect late next summer, early fall to be released. And I expect to enter into a contract with UNM to do this every 2 years, so it becomes kind of a standard, and we can look at trends and have some comparative analysis to work with. One thing I tried to get into this analysis is the impact our veterans and military spouses play on our economy. I think we might have some success in the veteran category, but the spouse category is going to prove very difficult, and I don't expect to have anything for that, although I'm continuing to work on ideas on how I can better support spouses and make sure that they can get employment that matches their skills and expertise, and they can contribute to the local economy as they desire. Next slide is really just an overview of all the federal grant opportunities that are out there. Many of them require a local match. And I think this is an opportunity for my department. I don't think New Mexico overall does very well in competing with these. And one of the things that I think could be helpful is if there was a pot of money that the state, through the commission that I direct, would be able to manage and apply funds from a state perspective as a match to some of these grants, it could prove to be helpful, or provide money to local military communities or installations so that they can do studies on what's appropriate, or putting in their proposals for competing for some of these grants. Since some of the rural communities may have some challenges coming up with the dollars to do that. So that's just an idea I'm thinking about. I need to get smarter on grant applications and how to master the art of understanding what they're looking for. That's an area that's a little bit out of my expertise, but potentially I could even contract somebody that has good understanding of that to help. The next slide, I talk about a communication strategy, and really this gets to one of the challenges of all of our, particularly our Air Force installations, is I think there are some bad perceptions about New Mexico, and I also think there are issues that military families may encounter, but they don't have ready access to who could help solve that. So I'm going to develop a website that will be kind of an all-inclusive, but provide an opportunity for families to address concerns. One of the things that I'm very interested in is how House Bill 30 is actually working. So it's very difficult to get feedback on whether spouses are able to get employment, whether their license is recognized by the state, whether there's long-term delays. So I'm hoping that through a website and through building a social media presence, that perhaps the dialogue can open up and I can get a better understanding of where some of the challenges are. And then once the COVID shutdowns start to get a little bit behind us, then I'll be out and attending some meetings in the military communities as well. So for the next slide, I'm way ahead. The biggest challenge I have is, I've been in the position now for, I think, 14 or 15 months, and I still don't have a commission, and that is a key component to my office and what I'm able to do. I know there are plenty of other boards and commissions who may also be in the same boat, so maybe just another person who is frustrated over the process, but I continue to try to push and get that established. The legislative piece, that deals with the renewable energy tool that I was talking about. I don't know if there's legislation that makes sense, but I will be exploring that to see if there's a way to reasonably drive developers to the tool and start that dialogue early. We'll be exploring some options there and see if there's any opportunity for legislation to help that process along. Also, we'll be looking at other compacts that we can enter into for other professions, and again, strengthen the opportunity for that portability of licensing for different professions. Some the Air Force have listed as kind of their preferred licenses, I guess, based on the number of spouses who hold those licenses. And again, the law aspect will also be addressed. Talked about the website. The Commander Summit, I actually had a summit lined up in March of this year, and we ended up canceling it about a week before it was scheduled to start due to COVID. But I believe that will be a good opportunity, probably not in this next 12 months or so, but maybe by next fall we can start considering getting something like that established again. But I believe that will be a good opportunity to have all of the installations meet and compare notes, share best practices, and then engage with state entities, which they often have interaction with. Two items that I did not put on the way ahead slide. I'm also going to be looking at intergovernmental support agreements and the potential for either the installations individually and communities to get into the agreement. And there's also interest in looking at statewide, but I don't know that that makes sense right now. So I'm going to reach out to the communities and the installations and see if there's a way that we can have them working better together in a mutually supportive way. So the IGSAs provide a mechanism for the bases really to save anywhere from 15 to 25% of their contracting costs by entering an agreement with the the local community, and then the community benefits also by all the dollars that get put into local businesses. So that's an area that I'm working on strongly. And then Space STEM Initiative is another area. When I first took the job, one of the key areas that all of the commanders talked about was public education system. And one of the directors at AR4RL cued me into this Space STEM initiative that has been, I think it was started in Virginia, but is going on in several places across the country, and it would allow students from grades 6 through 12 to engage in this program. And it's really a three-phase program. One is having a low-altitude balloon flight as a culmination at the end of phase 1, a high-altitude balloon flight at the culmination of phase 2, and then an actual rocket launch with a low Earth orbit that stays in space for about 5 days, but really engages a lot of the STEM core areas and provides kind of an exciting way to get kids interested in both STEM and space, which I believe New Mexico is well positioned to be a strong leader in the coming years. So with that, I know there's just a few more minutes left in my time, but I'll open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Myers, for that very comprehensive and informative presentation. And now we'll open it up to questions. And we have a question from Representative Garrett. Anybody else?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our presenter, because actually you had tons of content in just a small number of slides. I have 3 questions. The first is there, how many people are presenting phase 2 of the U.S. Spacecom headquarters? And is there any sense of how many of those phase 2 submissions would move to phase 3?
Madam, so there were 26 states and 31 cities or entities that made it to phase 2. We've been doing quite a bit of analysis on who our key competitors are, and of course, Colorado has a very strong presence in space, so we believe they will be a strong competitor. Florida, likewise. Probably Alabama will play a key role, and potentially California. But it's very difficult to know exactly how phase 3 is going to work. I expect there to be a handful that actually make it to that round. So, but that's just based on logistics and them having to make site visits. So I assume that they'll do a pretty severe cut and narrow it to 3 to 5.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My second question is, can you give us any perspective on broadband and internet on military bases? Do they provide it through local servers? Do they have their own systems? Is there any basic feedback you can give us on this?
I am not an expert on that. I do know that as we were looking at the package for Spacecom headquarters, we were working with the city on getting fiber into the area and making sure that they had great bandwidth and access. So I believe, well, I'm fairly confident, although I'm not positive, that it is a local provider that gives the broadband.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just your presentation made me realize that's another dimension. And my last question, Mr. Chairman and Colonel Myers, is as you work, you talked a lot about the perception of New Mexico by service members and their questions. On the basis, is there any effort of your office to provide support for service members to actually stay in New Mexico, especially a lot of the enlisted people that will have a second career? Is there any effort or planned effort about that aspect?
Mr. Chair and Madam, that is a key element of what my office will be trying to do, and not in any specific way, but to make sure that, and I think there's plenty of things that we can do as a state to incentivize veterans or prior service people to bed down here in New Mexico. And I know one of the issues that every commander I've talked to talks about is why New Mexico doesn't change their tax policy to incentivize veterans to continue work here. And I know factually, although the information I get is anecdotal, but every commander also says they find it difficult to hire civilians to fill their positions because of probably a variety of areas, but one being potentially the public education system that doesn't always get a very good rap. One would be the tax structure, and there could be other quality of life issues as well in there, but that's one area that I am definitely exploring very hard. And once the commission's in place and we begin having meetings at all the locations, that will be a focus of our efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, Colonel, for being so aware of all those things. I know this committee has talked about the taxing of veterans' pensions, and I hope our committee will address that in the next meeting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Representative Garrett. Next up, we have Representative Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Colonel Myers, for your presentation. I have a question on your economic impact study slide. Where you present that it's current, or in 2004 was $4 billion impact. Can you explain the two following numbers related to jobs and dollars? I'm not able to interpret what you're trying to communicate there.
And Mr. Chair, Representative Crowder, thank you for the clarification. So in 2004, 1 out of every 8.6 jobs was related to military spending, and 1 out of every almost $10 that New Mexico benefited from economically was as a result of the military.
Thank you for that. I just wasn't sure what that meant, what you were trying to let me know. My second and follow-up question, you're currently estimating the value at about $10 billion as far as the annual economic impact. I'm assuming that's of the 4 bases, the 3 air bases in Wismar. Is that correct?
And Mr. Chair and Representative Crowder, that is correct.
Thank you, Colonel. Can you tell me, ranking them like from 1 to 4, which installation has the largest impact, and in what order, going 1 through 4 headed down, please?
Mr. Chair, Representative Crowder, you forgive me, I do have this list, but it'll take some time for me to dig it out of my computer. But going off of memory, I believe White Sands probably, with all of their test missions, has the greatest impact. Kirtland would be second, I believe Cannon third, and Holloman fourth. Although Cannon and Holloman, I believe, believe are very close, somewhere in the half to 3/4 billion range.
And thank you for the response. If you could dig that out at some point and perhaps email it to Legislative Counsel to Jarrett Fleetwood, he can get that out to us. I would be curious to see those numbers and what your current estimates are. I know we have a little bit more current data out of Kennedy Air Force Base. I'm not familiar with the other three, but would like to see that broken down for all 4 of the installations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you, Representative Crowder. Next, we have Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colonel Myers, good morning. I just want to mention, for the Colonel's sake, that there is a program in New Mexico called Systems Go. It's a STEM program for mid-school and high school students. It's used a lot in rural areas to teach rocketry. The program's been in existence now for a number of years, and they do some very large rockets, and it's a multi-day event. They do it every year in April. NASA sends advisors in for the event, and parents become part of the chase crew. So it's a very, very impressive, very great learning platform for our students. And so when you mentioned the Space STEM program, I just wanted you to be aware we already have something similar to that, and there might be an opportunity for some coordination with that. So I don't know if you've heard about it or not, but I did want to mention it.
Mr. Chair, Representative Brown, thank you very much for the information. I was not aware of it. And I believe it sounds like it'll be either a great collaboration or something that we can grow upon. When I first started looking at the program, I envisioned kind of a statewide program, not limiting it to, my core function around military installations, but I really wanted it to be a statewide program. And as I gathered research, in order to get something like this, not as an after school, but as an established curriculum, it's going to take a lot of work. And that's my intent, is to work on developing a curriculum that will be accepted by PED and be an established program, in-school program, because I didn't want it to be an after-school program that might potentially limit the student availability to participate for various reasons. But so now my approach is I'm thinking about working with all the installations, the 4 major installations, and then going to their school districts and saying, hey, would you like to pilot this and get it going and see where it goes from there. And then hopefully as educators become familiar with the program, they can help develop the curriculum where it would be, established as an in-school type program. But Mr. Chair and Representative, thank you very much for the question and the information.
Very good. And thank you for the presentation this morning. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Brown. And next up, we have Senator Audra Colbert.
Thank you. I'm a senator now. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go back to the economic impact study. And my question is, in looking at the first bullet area, and you're saying the current estimate is about $10 billion when it comes to the 4 bases. My question is there a profession, when you look at all those 4 bases, that is more prevalent or more dominant than others? And if so, can you tell me what those professions are or what fields they encompass?
Mr. Chair and Representative, thank you for the question. That I think I would be hard pressed to to provide a really good answer on that, but it's a great question. I think I can do some research and study on what professions probably rise up to a more common need for the installations. Yeah, and each installation is different. You know, Kirtland has so many research and development agencies within the facility that you know, they rely heavily on engineering, all the sciences, and what have you, and actually compete heavily with the Sandia National Lab for some of the good talent. So their needs are potentially a little bit different if you look at it holistically than, say, a Holloman, who probably needs you know, contract support, facilities maintenance, and those types of things. But ma'am, it's a great question, and I will do some research and ask some questions to the local commanders to see what their assessment is, and then see if there's any data I can pull up on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason I asked that question, I carry the legislation here in the House with Senator Burt on licensing. And I often wonder, you know, we focus so heavily on and I forget the word, on licensing from one entity to the other and to make them available here in New Mexico. And I'm just wondered, you know, like I said, we focus so much on education. Are there other areas that, reciprocity is the word I'm looking for, are there other areas that some of these folks could look at that they don't realize that's available, you know, on some of the facilities? You know, we tend to focus on education, but there may be some, you know, spouses that coming in that have the capabilities of doing A, B, or C, but really don't realize that those positions are available, you know, when they relocate with their husband or with their wife here to New Mexico. So that's why I'm asking the question, because I think the more information that we can put out there, then, you know, that'll be better for the families that are relocating to New Mexico. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Representative. Next up, we have Representative Rudy Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Colonel Myers, for your presentation. Along with the suggestion from Representative Brown of a program that's out there, there's a program out of that's being used in southwest New Mexico, which is based out of Colorado. It's the acronym is STEAM. So that's a pretty successful program. And again, it's based out in the rural communities. My question was kind of in line with a couple of questions that were asked in this Reverend Baudrell Culbert's question on the reciprocity. Is it a matter of the licensing portion of it being a challenge to have those licenses approved by the state of New Mexico?
Mr. Chair and Representative Martinez, the transfer of the license is the challenge, and I can give you one anecdotal story that happened since House Bill 30 was passed. So Holloman had, I believe, two spouses who were coming in either, I believe one was an active duty member spouse and one was a civilian who was looking for a position on base whose spouse had a license, but it was in social work, and for whatever reason, neither one of those licenses were recognized, so they lost the civilian employee. He did not come, and I haven't followed up on the other, but that's one of the frustrations and challenges of trying to keep up with the legislation and see what its effect really is, and why I want to get to a more open dialogue through either social media or the web or whatever. But I need to get more information to be able to understand. But so when spouses are licensed and they come, typically, the military member has a very short tenure, so it's anywhere from 2 to 4 years, and as you get more senior, sometimes it's even less. So by the time they go through the license recognition process and all that has to occur, besides moving into a new location, by the time all that happens, they have very little time potentially left in the local area. So the whole purpose is to get them actively working in their profession as fast as possible.
Thank you for that, Colonel. Mr. Chair, I guess a follow-up. I introduced that bill in 2013, which was mostly directed as for educators, for teachers. But the bill that House Bill 30 that you mentioned has been amended, where it is supposed to cover all disciplines of professional licensures. And if there is a problem at the state level, I think that's something we do need to have a conversation about, so we can get those licenses expedited. And that was the idea behind that legislation from the very beginning, is to expedite the licenses. It didn't depend on the length of stay that individual was at one of the bases or White Sands. So I think we need to have that conversation and make sure that those licenses are provided in an expedited manner. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. We have a question from Representative Elkan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Myers. I was just going to refer a little bit to what Representative Martinez's comments on the reciprocity bill. If you know, if you remember, we started off with a 6-page bill and ended up with an 88-page bill hitting the governor's desk, and she signed that. The thing is that we had to cover every single job and make sure that every one of them was able to somehow or another be defined in statute so that it would carry through. Now, when you have a question about maybe somebody's licensure on a certain area didn't fit, maybe we missed that one job or that one job title. And if that is the case, we can always come back and amend next year if we have to. But I don't know where any problem would be. As of now, I had not heard of anything until exactly now, because everybody that was pushing for me to push this bill, and it was a lot of work. I think Peter Kovnat, our legislative analyst, spent, I'm going to say 45 days working on this bill throughout the interim. And even at that, before I could present it to my first committee, we had to amend it. So that's how difficult the bill it was. But we did get it done. If we missed a certain piece of employment, then we need to come back and rework it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was there a question there? Thank you, Representative Alcan. Mr. Myers, I have 3 quick questions, and I'll accept short answers. On page 4 of your handout, where it talks about the ranking of education, you got Canyon had 7 red and 2 yellow, whereas Kirtland had 8 yellow and 3 red, and they both got an overall rating of red. Even that doesn't make sense, because Kirtland seemed to have a lot better higher rank. It had a lot more yellow, but they both had an overall rating of red. Why is that? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I can hear you now, loud and clear.
All right. So the weighting plays a significant factor because academic performance criteria is 60% weighted in the grading, and the others are only 20%. The other 2 categories, I believe that's why graduation rate is probably the key factor we need to focus on.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that explanation. Also, you stated that New Mexico doesn't do well in obtaining grants. Briefly, why is that?
Mr. Chair, I believe it's part of the reason I believe is because many states hire outside contractors to work the grant process. Typically, I don't know of any grant that we in New Mexico have applied to. Granted, my tenure here is fairly short, but I don't believe that's a natural thing that we do. So part of my thought process was if we could apply a little more resource in terms of dollars to the effort, it may improve our competitive nature or standing among some of the other states that maybe have a lot more discretionary money in that area.
Okay, well, thank you for that explanation. And finally, my last question is on page 15. You talked about BRAC. I remember back in the 90s, they had a BRAC, and it recommended the closure of a considerable number of military facilities around the country. Is there an ongoing BRAC process at the moment?
Mr. Chair, I know that the services would typically like a BRAC, but the political appetite to hold one hasn't been there, so they have not asked for one in the recent past years. But due to the excess capacity at some of the installations, I believe that they would like to consolidate, they being the services, to help reduce some of their installation costs.
Oh, okay. Thank you again for your explanation. Thanks again for your comprehensive and informative presentation. Thank you for your time. And now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the guy ready? Dale Vendahay, who is the State Liaison Office of the South Central Region of the United States Department of Defense. So, Mr. Hay, take it away.
Hi, it's Dale Vandahay. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you this morning. Again, I'm Dale Vandahay, and I'm with the Defense State Liaison Office, which is located in the Office of Secretary of Defense, Military, Community, and Family Policy. And as just stated, I'm a regional liaison, and New Mexico is one of my states, and I'm located in San Antonio, Texas. It's my pleasure to be with you again to provide my annual update on the DoD key issues to this committee. Next slide. And this is the DSLO and of what we do is to work with you, state policymakers, to help change laws. And that's why I exist for the Department of Defense. Our office was created a number of years ago when the then Secretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness went to the Hill in Washington and was talking about these issues that impact transitioning military members and their families. And they told him, hey, you're in the wrong place. If you want to impact how military members and their families live due to state rights and federalism, you need to go work with state governors and state legislators. And that's why my office was created, and there's 8 of me around the country. Next slide. The next slide, we're going to go to how we do it. There we go. For those committee members who have not heard me brief before, I'm your resource to address state-centric issues that impact military members and their family, particularly as they transition to New Mexico. This morning, I will discuss the DoD key issues that were recently approved for 2021. And this is basically a potpourri of how I interface with you as needed. Easiest way to say this is at your beck and call in order to educate you on issues and then even come to hearings as need be, or work with the installations as need be to get constituents, people that deal with these issues that we're about to discuss firsthand. Next slide. Every year we have something called the 10 DoD key issues. When they're put on the slate, they last for a couple years until we can get about 35 to 40 or more states that sign up for the particular items. The new issue for us in 2021 is this Purple Star program that's being enacted to support school transitions in different states. The top several issues continue to be our primary focus, and they regard licensure. And conveniently, this is going to piggyback off of what's already been briefed by Greg Myers, because you'll see similar focus, except the grading criteria for the Air Force is a point system, as you have already been explained. For OSD, we're more interested in meeting particular aspects of legislation that I'll talk to you about. Again, on this slide, the top in bold are those still open items that I'm anxious to work with you all, and the bottom 3 are already completed. Next slide. To start talking about licensure, I wanted to express that last fall, the then new Secretary of Defense Esper added a 4th line of effort to the National Defense Strategy in this letter that he sent to the Council of Governors. And what it basically said is that the support of the military family is on top of his list with the other 3 line of efforts that were already there. Also, you may have seen the February 13th, 2020 letter that OSD sent to Governor Grisham that included the SecDef report on military spouse licensure, state best practices and strategies for achieving reciprocity. And that report defines a color-coded continuum that I'm going to show you next, because I want to walk you through it and show you where New Mexico is on that continuum, because it explains the DoD criteria for enhanced licensure, which again is different from what the Air Force basing criteria is. Next slide. This slide describes the various actions that states have taken or are taken across the country in the short term and also in the long term to legislate enhancements to legislative portability. So if you start on the left, this is where the states have done nothing. And New Mexico falls in bills that were done in 2013 and also your bill most recently, HB 30 in 2020, in order to improve the process. Now, what we're focusing now is on an enhanced process with the states in order to facilitate military spouses getting a particular license. We'll call it shortfall, if I may say that, for the current HB 30 is that it states in there that the individual must provide all the documents required for the application. That makes it most difficult for a military spouse because they already have a license. And now they're being asked to regurgitate everything that they've shown before in order to get their initial license. Also, this current bill initially had 30 days in it, and then it was changed to 60 days. It's interesting that HB 30 approaches teachers and about 37 other occupations. The reason why the bill's so long is because when the writer of the bill was working on it, in order to address the issue of fee waivers, he had to put in there stipulations on the coding of each license in statute. And that's what makes it long. And yes, it is long. And we appreciate, the department appreciates the fee waiver process. But again, the individual just can't come in with a license and be exempted and go to work because the boards require them to meet the licensing requirements that are substantially equivalent to the requirements of their particular board when they reach back to the sending state and review the license. It does state that a qualified applicant holds a current license in good standing, but it has these additional requirements that make it more difficult for a spouse to get to work. Now, the next slide is an intent to show you what other states have done. Now, I know when this bill was worked, that was the intent, was to perhaps mirror the Utah approach. Arizona has an approach that basically exempts the spouses. Texas has an approach where the licensing boards have to reach back to other licensing boards and see what their requirements are. So when an individual walks in the door, they know whether or not that license is up to speed like it should. Other states are simply, if they can't get everything completed, they provide a temporary license, temporary authority. For example, Ohio does 6 years, Colorado does 3 years. And then our minimum hope is that as the applicant comes in, if they sign an affidavit that basically says, I've done everything, everything's up to speed, and please put me to work within 30 days. Now, that's the short-term focus of what we're trying to work on with the states. And the long-term is these interstate occupational compacts that have been mentioned earlier. And they, in New Mexico has done the Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact, but there are 4 other compacts right now that are in the works. And I'm going to show you, New Mexico has made attempts in the past on a couple of those. They're the physical therapy, EMS, audiology, and the SIPAC, Psychological Compact. So those are additional things that we can work on. Next slide. Another aspect of the licensure portability is the implementation. You ask the boards to do certain things and to implement the law, but when I look on their websites to see if they have instructions for military spouses to include check the box forms, they're essentially lacking. And I found a couple websites that do that. What other states have done is they have addressed legislation that requires the boards to do certain things on making their websites more user-friendly to the military community. And that's perhaps something that can be worked. So any assistance you could provide in this area would be greatly appreciated. Next slide. Now, there are a number of things I want to do as I prepare with you for the 2021 session. The first item up there is there has been some general stated interest in the issues of advanced enrollment and virtual school enrollment. And I look forward to working with those representatives that have indicated such, and we'll keep that process going. The next items are the whole issue of helping out where I can to strengthen your enhanced licensure and this licensure evaluation we talked about. The three items below that are the three possible interstate compacts that are ripe as targets for 2021 or are possibilities. And the reason I say that is my office works with the national offices for these particular occupations, and they have worked with your state associations or state boards. So there's some interest out there, and what I plan to do is tap into your state boards. My focus in this is simply to be a supporting role to the state boards and the national organizations. Neatly enough, when I come to a hearing or make a presentation, I'm talking about what this does for the military community, and it helps in that process. These compacts are across the board in the occupation, for everybody in that occupation that's in New Mexico. The military piece is just a small slice, but it does help in some cases when the military steps up to the plate and explains that this is very much a transition issue for military spouses. And the last item is something I'm working on through something called the Building Healthy Military Communities. And there is a New Mexico working group on suicide prevention underway. And so I'm hoping that they might consider this Ask the Question approach, which is one of our initiatives. In fact, later this afternoon, on the schedule, there's a veteran suicide prevention. So I hope to listen in on that to get a more update on that particular item. So again, I look forward to your continued support, and I thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, be happy to answer them. Next slide, so you know who I am and what I do and what my numbers are on the website. Any questions, please? And again, thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hay, for your very comprehensive report. And now we will entertain questions from the audience. Anyone have any questions? Senator Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I only have a small, short question. Mr. Hay indicated in the last slide regarding the program for suicide prevention. Is there a high rate of suicide in the military, Mr. Hay?
I'm sorry. I just snickered, and that wasn't polite, but the answer is yes. Higher than you want to know, or the typical veteran number is around 21, they say, a day. But yes, it does occur. In fact, within the past month, there was a suicide here in Texas at Fort Hood. So yes, that's a problem.
So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay, are you providing services to these young individuals that are either attempting or are committing suicide prior to the act?
While they're on active duty, is that the question?
Yes, Mr. Hay, I'm sorry, I should have.
Yeah, the installations do everything they can to provide and identify through the family advocacy program and the mental health programs. But obviously the big issue is identifying who might have tendencies in this regard. That's why we're hoping that, like other states have implemented strong programs in suicide prevention. I don't know if you've heard about them, but there's city challenges, mayor's challenges, and state governor's challenges in conjunction with the Veterans Affairs folks in Washington to address this issue.
And Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay, is this prior to the COVID, prior to March of 2000, or has this been going on for years, but we've never heard about it? Because honestly, this is a new thing that I'm hearing today. I mean, I've served in this committee for several years, and I'd never heard of suicide rate climbing or high suicide rate in the military prior to today.
Again, it's all encompassing. The focus is on veterans. Now, to me, the military is part of that, but yes, the veteran rate is higher than it should be. Now, I don't have the specific numbers by installation in New Mexico, and when they happen, I'm sure they deal with them, but I don't have those exact numbers. I can tell you that veteran suicides is a concern across the country.
And Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay, is that because of the services, homelessness, families have left them, alcoholism, drug addiction? Is that the reason for behind veteran suicides?
Yes, all those issues impact it.
Well, I can only tell you that it's very heartening because, I've had a couple of nephews commit suicide in my family, and it's a very difficult pill for the family to swallow, especially if you didn't see any signs of it. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Senator. Next up, we have Senator Padilla has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hay, for your presentation. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick, I apologize. I had a little bit of technical difficulty, so you may have answered this, Mr. Hay, so I apologize. But Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay, are you a one-man show? Do you have other folks that help you? This is a large state with large military communities.
Yes, I am a one-man show in New Mexico, as well as my other states of Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And I am tied to an office in D.C. that is people in it, but there are 8 of me around the country. And so we share our activities. We share what the other states are doing. We share our best practices and one-pagers, as we call it. Fortunately, I get to New Mexico for these hearings in person over the past number of years. Last year, I was in Gallup with you. So it's a disadvantage not being able to come and see you. Yes.
So yes, I do remember, Mr. Chairman, I was in Gallup with you when you were there, and that was, and I know military folks to be very resourceful, hardworking, and will get anything done that has to get done. And I know that you'll do that. So I just hope that, you will ask, or we can help you, or however, to get you the resources and the help that you need. I think you provide a very valuable service, in my opinion. And so I hope that we can help you that way. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Dale can hear you, yes.
Okay. Just everyone's screen seemed to have frozen up. I don't know. But the other thing is, are you aware of these offices that have been pulled together just, again, out of sheer necessity and communities wanting to do something in our universities and community colleges in different parts of the state? Mr. Hay, are you aware of those?
Not particularly, no.
It just seems to me like the work that you're doing would fit like a glove with what they're doing, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay. I encourage you to reach out to CNM, UNM. I know that several other schools have done some things. I think there's even an office on one of the native, at one of the native universities, et cetera. So I highly encourage you to do that because I think you're going to find some really ready, willing, and able and helpful people to you with your mission and with the work that you do. So I would just make that recommendation.
I sense that their focus is on veterans predominantly, correct?
It is.
And my focus is on that transitioning military member moving from state to state. And I don't know that they particularly get into those issues. Also, my entry point on issues is through you all at the committee, on the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, and I work with Jared often. And my success or failure is based on whether or not the committee members step up to the plate on some of these subjects, because what happens is, and the reason why we're talking now, is that once we work through that and we get a bill drafted, then it's got to be approved by the interim committee before it goes into the legislature. As you well know, I'm speaking to the choir. So I look for any support I can get from you all that are interested in getting educated on these issues. We have one-pagers, we have best practice papers that lay out all these subjects.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hay. I just simply mentioned those veteran resource centers simply because at some point, the folks you're dealing with are going to be going to those centers. So it just seemed like it would be a little bit of help for you, but, just up to you, however you want to do that.
I'll work through Jared and see what we can do with it. Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you for pulling this agenda together, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you, Senator. And next up, we have Representative Serenard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hay. I just have a couple things. I'll be quick. And thank you for your presentation. So in your presentation, you said there were sites that were difficult for some of our veterans or some of their families to access. Is there a way you could send us particulars on those sites so we can get them, fix them, make them better? Could you do that?
Well, yeah, I have periodically, I look on the web to look at the licensing boards to see which ones have contact through websites with military families. And I've only identified a couple, but there are some 37 boards that are impacted by this legislation that you passed earlier in the year. How does a military spouse know what to do if there isn't something they can go to on the web for that licensing board that walks them through the application process and hopefully has a check the box form so the board even knows that they're a military spouse or a military member? But I'd be happy to send you what I have right now. You and I have been working with each other in the past, so looking forward to doing that again. Thank you.
So more of a how-to, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, a how-to, or do we need a pamphlet sent out to the bases or to the military base when they know somebody's coming and kind of introducing them to what we have for them? Would that work?
Well, that ties in really to the Colonel Myers comment about a website that's user-friendly, like other states have done for any military members, and that ideally you would go on that website and then have a link to the boards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hay. The other question is, okay, so I've heard of the suicide rates. I work with a lot of veterans. Is there anything particular that you could see that New Mexico, that we as a state can do to help our veterans in this area? Anything particular?
Well, offhand, that's not my area of expertise, and that's why I brought up that there's a veteran suicide prevention discussion at 2:45 this afternoon. It has a TBD, so I don't know who's given it, but I can't wait to hear what they tell me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
No,
Good day.
thank you, Representative. Next up, we have Representative Padro Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think mine has pretty much been answered because I was trying to find out, was it veterans that were having the suicide rate, or was it transition military, or was it active duty military? And what I'm hearing you say, that is transition military.
The predominant problem is veterans. Yes, there are some military, active duty military in that number, but the state can reach out and help both populations. Yes.
Okay, I know that as a military spouse, when we retired, that there were classes that were made available to us to attend, and it talked about just the merit of things and kind of what was going on in the areas where we had chosen to relocate to. So based on your information or your knowledge, do those classes still exist? And is that information that's provided during those classes, if they still exist? Because ours was about jobs and about housing and about school systems and medical facilities and access. And it kind of went on. We had, in fact, almost a month of classes that we could attend to get information on what was available, you know, in the area or in the region. So is that access not provided by the military anymore?
Oh, no, it's called the Intro Program, and bases take that to heart. They have efforts to have military members that reach out to the incoming military members. They're called sponsors. So all that is a continued effort, and it's just a matter of the effectiveness of that program at each installation and the opportunity for spouses who can also attend. I think that's what you're referring to when someone transitions to a base or a post. The other part is there are still programs where the individuals getting out of the service are given instructions on how to best exit the military community and get into the civilian community, although that information is typically focused on that local area and not necessarily going to another state or another city. Does that help, the two pieces of that?
Yes, I was more concerned with the latter as far as the information. Because
the transition program is very effective, and it's worked through typically the Department of Labor in conjunction with the people on base, in this case, the Family Support Center for the Air Force.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Representative. And next up, we have Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vandehey, I just need a little bit of clarification on the licensure reciprocity or portability. I don't remember the specifics of House Bill 30, but if a military member is coming to New Mexico to retire and has a spouse who has an active license and wants to continue working, does the current law cover that situation, or does the military member have to be active duty?
I read HB 30, a couple of years when an individual processes out, and I believe during that time, there is a definition in there of veteran that includes the spouse for those first couple of years. But I can recheck that.
Okay, and the reason, Mr. Chair, and sir, the reason I bring it up, there are a lot of us who represent districts that do not have a military installation, but we may have folks who move here to retire. Of course, there's some reasons they don't come, like we tax retirement benefits and things like that, but this would be, if it's not the situation right now, this would be a reason to make an amendment to cover that eventuality. So
the answer to your question, and I have it right here, it defines recent veteran means a person who has received an honorable discharge or separation from military service within the 3 years immediately preceding the date the person applied for a professional or occupational license pursuant to this section, and it doesn't reference anything about the spouse. You're right.
okay, all right, that was my question. Thank you so much for the answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point.
Oh, thank you, Representative. Anyone else? Representative Garrett has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. It is Mr. Vande Hey, right? Not
Correct.
Mr. Hay.
That's a two-split word, and it gets butchered all the time.
Okay, it sounds very Dutch.
It is.
I just have a request on that slide, the 10 DOD key issues for 2021. Could you send those one-pagers to Jarrett Fleetwood to distribute to us? Because I know last time you were here, you talked about some, but I do see the new ones. It would just be very helpful if you could email them to him and he could disperse them.
Absolutely. Any particular subject or cover them all?
I would cover them all because I know that different folks on the committee have kind of different thrusts. I'm interested, last time we talked a little bit about virtual school enrollment. Virtual schools have changed radically in the last 6 months. The Ask the Question campaign, the Purple Star School program, but actually kind of updates on the advanced enrollment. That would just be very helpful if you could do that.
Be happy to. We have our 2021 papers in production right now, and we're told we'll have them after October 1st. Hopefully, once I get those in a new format that's being developed, I will definitely send them to Jared and he can send them out. Happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vande Hey.
Oh, thank you, Representative. And next up, we have Representative Rudy Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Van Hey. Looking at your list that you provided, that's quite extensive on the challenges that you must carry. One question I have for you is, do you get involved with veterans transportation? Because here in New Mexico, it seems that the veterans that live out in the rural communities have.
I do not. About a year ago, I was speaking with the Veterans Affairs on the Ask the Question issue, and I know that is a big problem and an issue in New Mexico, but we do not get into that area, no.
Thank you very much. Maybe you would be so kind to direct us to who we should contact.
Within New Mexico, sure, I'd be happy to provide Jarrett, the person I spoke with about a year ago that's working that problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Also, I know, sorry to interrupt, but the Building Better Communities is an individual by the name of, her first name is Valentina. She works for the TAG in New Mexico. I'll contact her also because I recently heard her brief on this subject. Be happy to do that for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, anyone else have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gonzalez.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also to our presenter, and thank you for the information. I guess in the line of, as you were talking about on suicide, but also is there any information within the area of knowing the number that are homeless, that are veterans?
I would not know that information, no, sir. That would, hopefully the Veteran Affairs world knows that within New Mexico.
Bert have a question?
Yeah, very well, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I'll ask him. I think he does. No, thank you, Senator. Senator Burt, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And Neil, Mr. Vande Hey, good to see you and hear you again. Bill Burt from Alamogordo and Holloman Air Force Base. And
absolutely, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Back to, I know Senator Padilla had suggested contacting the colleges. All the colleges, well, most of them have some kind of contact on base that might help you connect again with the veterans. I guess my question is, and maybe a comment to the committee as well, the budget for military-based planning is very small. And I think Greg Myers has a partial assistant in economic development. My thought would be that if he had a partial to full-time assistant, if the work would be there, Mr. Vandehey could also use that person as a go-to person. And we're keeping the effort for military as well as veterans concise, and having one funnel, which would be the director of military-based planning, Greg Myers. Mr. Vandehey could contact that office and could funnel things out through that administrative assistant. So I'm just bringing a thought to the table. I don't know if that would help Mr. Vandehey with his efforts in New Mexico, but they could do some busy work for you, increase the efficiency of what Director Myers is also trying to do, base planning. So I'm trying to look at efficiencies, number one, but secondly, a budget very small, quite frankly, in the big scheme of things, a budget increase for base planning that would allow conductivity as well as efficiency to help out to both these gentlemen and the efforts that they're putting forth into an industry that has invested and probably would cost over $10 billion to recreate here in New Mexico. And I think that we should also be very much aware of the priorities of the DOD and certainly the Air Force in the state of New Mexico, which is number one, license reciprocity and the education process here in the state. And I think that we probably ought to have some more education or some discussions with Secretary Ryan on education and how the numbers are presented to the Department of Defense with regards to making sure that we are put in the best possible light. And so I just want to plant that seed with the committee and the chairman, and any feedback from anyone, maybe offline, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Bill, thank you very much for your time.
So thank you. I know that Jared would love for me not to have to get hold of him all the time, and that's the bug. You can ask Jared. Thank you. He's my go-to.
Okay, thank you, Senator Burt. Any other questions? If not, we stand adjourned until 1:15, at which time we will reassemble back here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, and yeah, thank you again, Mr. Hay, for your informative presentation. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Good job.